another attack this morning from Hezbollah against the north, one civilian seriously injured. How long does Israel put up with this, Haviv?
Hezbollah has one lever of influence over us, and that is that escalating to the truly devastating war that both of us are capable of, both sides, for both sides, devastating for both sides, is something that we very much don't want. Hezbollah's great strategic problem is that it has already told Israelis it will carry on this low intensity kind of war, this small bombardment that has already demolished a third of the city of Metula and probably 10 different villages on the northern border, literally demolished, homes that cannot be, they have to, by building codes, be demolished and then rebuilt. Um, Over the course of 10 months of this low intensity bombardment, they've told us they're going to do this until we're all dead and gone. And once you tell the other side that they have nothing to hope for except total and complete destruction, slow moving or fast moving, that's the only choice available to them, you lose that influence. So Hezbollah just carried out a drone attack that critically wounded an Israeli. The last time Yemen launched at us, the Houthis of Yemen, I should say, launched at us 120 missile strikes before one drone got through. And our response, what was that, 3 weeks ago, was a response that exacted a cost for all 120 and not for the one that got through. And so I got through and killed somebody in Tel Aviv and wounded 3 people. And so I suspect this will be an Israeli. This is a Hezbollah response to us taking out 4 of their operatives, including one commander in Lebanon in the last 24 hours. And I suspect we're going to have another Israeli response. We have, over the last 10 months, killed 400 of their fighters and commanders, some of them very, very senior commanders. They have been paying a tremendous cost, and they think that we will eventually leave this land. And that is literally how they talk. Nasrallah gave 3 speeches in the last month and said that. Um, we have sticking power, they don't, and we are not demolishing our own country the way they are in order to destroy another country. So all of that comes to say, I don't know if this will spark a massive Israeli retaliation that will escalate into that terrible war, but I do know that Israel has more options than Hezbollah does, and by the time Hezbollah knows that, it'll be too late.
Haviv, I listened with great interest to your conversation that was posted yesterday with Dan Senor at the Call Me Back pod, because it may be the first time I've heard frustration from both you and Dan about President Biden, Vice President Harris, Secretary Blinken. They've been wrong about everything after their initial bear hug of Israel. They simply have prolonged the war. They have denied weapons that Israel needs. Their advice is almost uniformly wrong. I'm pretty sure you're aware of what Secretary Gates said about Joe Biden. He'd been wrong about every national security issue for the past 40 years. Now it's 50 years. Do you think the Israeli government has adopted the attitude of, that's very nice, thank you very much, we'll do what we want to do?
I think that the last 3 weeks, to my tremendous satisfaction and almost happiness, because so much is at stake for us. In the last 3 weeks, the Israelis finally declared quietly independence from American foreign policy and started exacting massive costs from Iran. Here's the deal: Iran is destroying the Middle East. Iran is engaged in a massive empire building project that is steadily and systematically demolishing countries throughout the Middle East. It is now publicly, openly, it has said this, starting to invest massively in the Muslim Brotherhood of Jordan in order to overturn Jordan. Jordan is an American ally. Hezbollah is destroying with Iranian weapons and guns, and literally at Iran's orders. It receives, and it is simply a branch of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, is destroying Lebanon, even as America tries to stabilize and fund and help Lebanon and work with the Lebanese central bank and all that stuff. America cannot fix the Middle East faster than Iran is demolishing the Middle East. And so Israel has finally said, we're not going to let the Iranians fight us on the backs of Arab nations. We're not going to have dead Lebanese civilians in the service of Iran never paying a cost. We're going to start exacting a cost from Iran. And that's what you've seen. Hania killed in Tehran, which Israel has not accepted responsibility for. I don't know that it's Israel, but truly nobody in the region can imagine that it's anybody else. And the chief of staff of the Hezbollah's military wing, an Iranian general in charge of Lebanon and Syria, We have the attack in Hodeidah in Yemen. The attack in Hodeidah in Yemen that destroyed the Houthis' main oil export port and their main source of foreign currency income is fascinating because it was done with old F 15s, not the brand new F 35s. It was not a show of our real capabilities. It was a show of what we could do with our capabilities from 25 years ago. And it's 400 kilometers farther than we would have had to fly to bomb Bandar Abbas, the great oil export facility of the Iranian regime. And so it was definitely a message to Iran: careful where you're headed because we can cause you terrible damage.
Now, this
I
is a
didn't answer you
question
over
that
5
Dan
minutes.
did not ask you. That I know
Yeah.
that I think you're lucky to have Prime Minister Netanyahu right now because he's dealt with a lot of American presidents and he knows a lame duck when he sees one, and he can be indifferent to Vice President Harris because he thinks he's going to lose. But does everybody else in Israel agree with Netanyahu, Likud, and Yoav Gallant that it's time for Israel to make its own decisions and to pay no attention to the man behind the curtain named Tony Blinken or the fellow who's fallen apart in the White House? Does every party agree, whatever we're going to do, we don't need the Americans' help in doing it?
Look, I'll say this. First of all, you know the White House much better than I do. You know to talk about Tony Blinken and Harris and all the different figures in the administration and how that all works inside much more than I know. So I can't tell you exactly what all the Israelis think. There are different opinions in Israel of who runs what in Washington and who we talk to and whether how much we have to be bipartisan or don't have to and which Democrats we have to work with or not. It's a big, complicated question. I want to zero in on a very simple point that all Israelis, I think, do agree. All Israelis don't agree on anything, but the vast majority of
Huh.
mainstream Israel agrees on, and that's this: as of today, we'll take an example from today, but this happens 3 or 4 times a week. The American administration is quoted as saying to the Israelis, "Don't push it," in the Israeli response to whatever Iranian attack is expected. America is saying to the Israelis publicly, leaking it to reporters, that it is telling the Israelis not to allow its response to whatever the Iranian attack is that is coming, that Iran keeps saying is coming, that Khamenei himself gave a speech saying Iran is going to do, not be a significant response. Now, here's the frustration of Israelis. This is true of Biden, the National Security Council, the State Department, everyone involved, maybe except CENTCOM. CENTCOM really has stood next to the Israelis. It doesn't make political statements. It only does it's the platform essentially on which the Israelis and their Sunni allies in the region work together. I don't know Israeli complaints about CENTCOM, but when it comes to policymakers in Washington, this is true of all of them. And what is true is that they are constantly telegraphing to the enemy that they can attack fiercely and that Israel will face an American pressure not to respond fiercely. Now, when you tell the Iranians, okay, this isn't strategy 101, this is strategy preschool. If you tell the Iranians that the Israeli response to whatever they're going to do is going to be contained by Israel's allies, you are telling the Iranians to go for a larger attack. I don't know how simpler it can get than that. I don't know why this is complicated when you get to Washington. I have heard that complaint, and now I'm talking about something that happened today, but I've heard that over the last 10 months from every Israeli I know, and I don't just mean Likud. I'm talking people in Meretz. They don't want a great war with Iran. They want a Palestinian state, including in the West Bank. The progressive left of Israel says, why do the Americans constantly telegraph that they're going to contain Israel? That is how Iran attacks harder and does more and does worse. So the frustration is very deep. And
Now,
I got to
Aviv,
tell
you've
you,
been
if
here a
you
few
have interest in
times.
the Middle East, you got to stop doing that. Yes.
You have been here enough times to realize that the Democratic Party has within it a pro-Palestinian faction. Indeed, it has within it a pro-Hamas faction, and that Vice President Harris is to the left of left. If she does not pick Josh Shapiro, and you'll have to trust me on this, Josh Shapiro is the obvious choice politically. Pennsylvania, they don't win without Pennsylvania. He's very popular. He's very articulate. He's young. He's dynamic. He's smart. He's been a guest on this show. He knows how to work the refs. He knows how to work the ropes. He's a terrific candidate. If Kamala Harris does not pick him today, do Israelis take a message from that? And if so, what's the message?
It is a little bit startling, I think, to Israelis who pay attention to American elections, which is a minority of Israelis. It's a subset of Israelis. Israelis live their lives in Hebrew. They love America with a passion. They want to visit America, but they don't necessarily understand this kind of sort of inside baseball of American politics. But those who do follow, they're kind of amazed because Shapiro has never said anything outside the mainstream of the Democratic Party up until 2 years ago. He has never, as a young Jew, he volunteered in Israel for a little bit, not in the Israeli military, as people have pretended or said about him. It's a little bit like, I don't know what to tell you. He's such a mainstream Jewish Democrat in every way. And he ticks a lot of the progressive boxes, and he can also run a state competently. Now, there are other reasons I understand. Look, he's a guy in public service. There's other complaints about him and policy issues and all that. Great, fine. That's got nothing to do with me. But the campaign against him is so clearly a campaign against him being a Jew, because if you have other candidates who have said the same things about Israel and have said them in the same way and have said them more often in support of Israel, and they're not having this campaign, that wing of the Democratic Party has a Jew problem, and it has nothing to do with Shapiro's own personal views. In fact, over the last couple of weeks, to my I don't know, my heart goes out to the guy, but I also have a hard time respecting it. He's kind of tried to walk back some of the support of Israel or some of the feelings he has toward Israel as a Jew. That's what you need in the Democratic Party today to make it. I that rubs me wrong. I'm not an American Jew. I'm not an American politician, but that's not how a Jew should behave.
How shocked are you? We got a minute to the break, Aviv, and I want to talk to you after the break. On a level of 1 to 10, this is sort of borrowing from the commentary podcast. What is your level of shock at the descent of the Democratic Party into anti-Israel rhetoric and policy?
I think it's very dangerous for the Democratic Party because it isn't a descent into that radicalism. It's I don't know what to call it, an ascent into pretty awful elitism. And it's becoming an elite versus working class election, and that's very dangerous for them. And I don't know why they're so dumb as to allow it.
Aviv, if Israel were to strike Iran directly, what do you think Iran would do? I have a feeling they would back up, just like the United States hit Soleimani and Iran went quiet. I don't think they would try and get into a war with you. They talk a good game, but generally speaking, they're not very good at this. What do you think they would do in response to a preemptive raid by Israel on either the oil refinery or the nuclear weapons refinery or the IRGC headquarters?
Their fundamental strategy is to look like what Moshe Dayan, the old Israeli military strategist and defense minister, used to call the wounded tiger. Um, you don't go near a wounded tiger because it's very dangerous, because it, in its panic, might do things that would hurt it. Iran is trying to project that outward to the world. In other words, if you attack us, the fallout will be catastrophic. You can't handle the fallout. And that works on the West. And it works on the West because the West is so used to comfort and safety that it really cannot imagine being willing to walk to the brink. It also doesn't see a reason to walk to the brink. It's not going to come save, Yemen. 250,000 Yemenis can starve to death. That doesn't really move anyone in any Western capital. And Syria only mattered to the world because it produced millions of refugees that the West had to take in. Otherwise, the West would not have cared about 800,000 dead, about essentially a couple of different genocides happening in Syria, even when it was happening to Syria's Christians. And so, the West doesn't want to pay a cost for facing down Iran. So Iran kind of has that strategy of looking dangerous. It isn't. It's a Persian ethnic government overseeing a country that is only 48% Persian. One of the reasons the Mossad can keep finding new agents to take out people in Iran and has this tremendous penetration even of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is what we saw with the killing of Hania, is simply that there's so many minorities that feel so oppressed in Iran by this regime. Iranian Persians, most of them don't like this regime, and they don't like it so much that they're actually secularizing. We actually have fascinating polls of religion in Iran that show us that it is a country undergoing secularization under the regime of the Ayatollahs. I submit to you, because of the regime of the Ayatollahs. That's why the recent anti-regime protests that really caught and really exploded in Iran have all been about women's headwear, because the Iranian regime has turned religion into a part of the architecture of oppression. And so Iran is not strong. I'll say even more than that. The Revolutionary Guards is a second army. After the Iranian army, there's a main Iranian army that answers to the Iranian government. And then there's a special ideological army called the Revolutionary Guards that answers straight to the supreme leader. That
30
Revolutionary
seconds,
Guards
Haviv.
controls a huge part of the economy, including the major oil and gas infrastructure. If you hit the oil and gas infrastructure, the regime is in agony, and the people do not suffer. And so there's so much vulnerability there. It's a regime that talks a big talk and is profoundly vulnerable. And if the West cared, Iran would be much fixable quickly.